All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the room. This is the WGF Library Script Breakdown. I'm Lauren O'Connor, your co-host for this event.
And I'm Javier Barrios, and we're librarians at the Writers Guild Foundation Library. As you probably know about the WGF Library, we collect TV and film scripts on the first floor of the WGA West building here in LA.
And you're probably wondering when we'll reopen our doors to in-person visitors. We are wondering the same thing, but hopefully it shouldn't be too much longer. In the meantime, you can still email us at library@wgfoundation.org if you have questions or need anything. But just be forewarned, if you email me, when is the library going to reopen? The response will be, I don't know. So now if you're new to this and it's your first time joining us for a script breakdown, this is how it works.
So basically, Lauren and I sit down virtually with a writer. We talk at length about a script that they wrote with pages right on the screen.
And we're so excited today to welcome Siân Heder to talk about her screenplay for a movie that made both Javier and I sob. It's CODA. So welcome, Siân. Huge virtual round of applause.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. So basically we're going to have the remainder of the 90, then all the 90 minutes on the clock to go through the script in detail. So if you're watching this on Zoom and you have a thought and a question, please submit it. But just please know that we might not have time to get to the questions. But ask it anyways. We'll try to get to them, and maybe we'll even ask the question that you have anyway. Before maybe you get lucky that way.
Before we really get started here, I'm gonna just put into the chat a link where you can read this script on deadline if you want to follow along in greater detail. Hold on one second. Let me just do that for everyone. Boom, there we go. All right. So now that's about enough from us. Siân, welcome again. So let's start off with a couple contextual questions.
Sure.
Yeah, so basically, first thing is we heard you describe yourself as a self-taught writer. And so my question is, did you read a lot of scripts? If so, like what kind of script did you read, and how did you learn the craft? Or how did you teach yourself the craft?
I would say, self-taught is one way to say it. I think taught by all my writer friends is another way to say it. I'm just a big believer in like having other people read your stuff. So from the moment that I started writing, I think I was sharing it with people who were better at it than I was, and getting their notes and getting their thoughts and kind of rewriting based on that. And I was always a part of writers groups. So from the beginning, when I started, the way I actually even started kind of formally writing screenplays, I was an actor. And I was always a writer in my own life. That was kind of my outlet. I always wrote for me. And when I moved to LA, there was a group called Tuesdays at 9, and they would meet at St. Nick's Pub, and actors would come and writers would come, and you'd bring in like 10 pages of your script as a writer, and actors would cold read the script. So I started going to it as an actor. And it was really fun as an actor because there was no judgment of it, or you had never read it, and you'd get up on stage in front of a whole room full of people and read cold. So it was great as an actor. But as I was going and listening to writers and hearing their work, I was really feeling like, oh, I feel like I should bring in my own writing here and start to share it here as well. And so I always had that. I had Tuesdays at 9, which is sort of where I started writing. And then I had a Monday night writers group again, which was actors and writers. And it was always like bringing in 10 pages. It was and hearing it aloud with actors. And so that was almost my training ground in a way. And then getting feedback, like I said, from people. I'm a big reader in my life, and it's not necessarily screenplays, but I've always devoured books and novels and story in whatever form. And then I would say I did a lot of labs too. Like I did like the Nantucket Screenwriting Lab, and I did the Film Independent Lab, and I did the AFI Directing Workshop for Women. So I was always putting myself in some kind of lab or school setting. And then I did like UCLA Extension, and I did, so I kind of cobbled together like a film education through labs and classes and these groups of writers that I always belonged to. And then I would say being in a TV writer's room was also an incredible training ground in terms of learning from other writers, learning from, I worked for first Mike Royce and Ray Romano on Men of a Certain Age. And then I worked for Genji Cohan on Orange is the New Black. And all of those people are brilliant. And all the writers in those rooms were brilliant. So in a way, it was like an on-the-job education as well, in terms of how to make story work and how to make a joke land and how to make an emotional moment land, and how to bounce your brain off other people's brains to make a good story. So I don't know, when like self-taught, to me, I imagine like me sitting alone reading a bunch of screenplays at my laptop. So it was a very social kind of self-taught, where I was finding people that were good at it and involving myself with them.
Got it. So what was the very first thing you did when you knew that you were going to adapt this French film? Do you remember?
Like the very first thing I wrote?
Yeah, or planned, or like when you sat down.
Well, okay. This was like, it's so interesting to revisit your process and be like, what was it? I knew it was really important to find my own film, right? Like I knew that I wanted to take the premise of the movie, and I wanted to take the scenes that stayed with me, but not ever use the script, or not ever use. So I watched the movie once, and I think I watched it before I went in and pitched on it, and never watched it again. And it was almost like the scenes that had lodged themselves in the back of my mind for whatever reason, whether they were particularly funny or particularly emotional or had something kind of key that I wanted to keep. I think the first thing I did was just kind of go back into my memory of the movie and just jot down what those scenes were for me. Like what were the things I wanted to keep from the original. And again, this was like a totally different family. It was a totally different setting. It was like, so I knew so much of it was going to change, but there were kind of some key elements that I felt like, oh, that's a really interesting moment. Or, so I think that was the first thing I did, was kind of, from memory, like replay the movie in my head and go, what do I want to save? Like, what are elements that I want to save? And then oftentimes what I'll do, and I don't think I actually did it with CODA, but I'll put up on cards. I'm actually in my office right now, so I can show you guys, but like, cool. That's what I'm working on now. So that's not all the scenes in the movie that I'm doing. I'm sort of, those are the pieces those are scenes I know I want. And then I have a whiteboard over here that my kids have drawn on it. The problem is letting my children up here, because then they like erase the second act and draw pictures on it. But I'll kind of have cards, and then I'll use the whiteboard to like start connecting the dots. Like if I know I have this scene and I know I want to get to here, like what are some ways that I can get there? So I think I'm always looking for ways to get away from my laptop when I'm writing. Even just standing up and being in the space and moving things around and looking at them on a wall really helps me to see storylines or different colors for characters, or kind of just visually track the movie in my head.
That's fascinating. And after that step, do you go ahead and do outline after that, or is that your outline? Like what's your like day-to-day beyond that step?
I'll do an outline. So usually I'll start with I'll either start with cards, or I'll start on the whiteboard, just kind of writing like, these are some beats that I see in act one. cards are kind of annoying because you can't like erase them, but you can move them around. And have them. But so I'll do that. And then generally, like when I feel like I have a sense of basically like this feels like the end of Act 1 and this feels like the end of Act 2 and this, then I'll kind of start like beat sheeting, like have it loosely in my head. I think when I'm writing, when I don't have to turn that part in, like sometimes like in TV or whatever, you're turning in your outline. When I'm just writing for me, it's like, I'm real loosey-goosey with it sometimes. Like, I know, like, okay, I know I want to get to this point at Act 2. I don't know how I'm going to get there. Then I'll just get in there and let the characters start talking to me and see what scenes want to happen and like know that that's the end of my journey. Right. But I hate outlining. I mean, it's so helpful. I need it.
Yeah. I hear that. So without a lot of precedence for this type of film, aside from the film that it's, kind of loosely inspired by, did you have other movies or stories or things that you looked at when you were developing it?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of going back to a kind of family drama that I don't think it's made a lot anymore. Like Running on Empty, like going back to like, what were those kind of classic movie? Like this felt like a classic movie. Like it wanted to be like Billy Elliot. I mean, not Billy Elliot. And that's like a younger kind of more of a family movie. But at the same time, the adults are going through real shit in that movie. Like the adults in that movie are in the middle of that mining strike. There's other things happening in his world that are real and legit and have stakes, and you don't watch it and feel like that movie is silly or for young people. So I think that's what I was looking at, is how do you have a teenage character but not make a teenage movie? Right. And the way that I was really doing it is looking at like, this is not a coming of age for Ruby. This is a coming of age for every character in the movie. Wow. So what's Jackie's coming of age? What's Frank's coming of age? What's Leo's coming of age? How does this family need to grow up and transform? And like, let me track each one of those journeys through the movie.
Yeah, because the dependence on each other was just, holding them all back.
I mean, I was laughing because someone said it to me and I didn't even realize, like, there was always this double meaning to the title, which was, CODA is a child of deaf adults. It's also a musical term, which means like the end of the piece of music that kind of wraps it up and completes it, which felt very apt for what the subject matter was. And then someone else was like, but CODA is also Codependence Anonymous.
Oh, wow.
Whoa.
And I was like, oh my God, but it's also really fitting because this is also like enmeshed and needs to break away from each other. Like, and so that was just a funny, I did not put that meaning in there intentionally, but people brought it up to me after it.
That's great.
When did the title come about in the process?
It came kind of early, actually. And then I questioned it. There was a whole scene in the movie that explained the title, but then because I was worried that people would be like, she never says it. No one ever says it in the movie. No one ever says child of deaf adults that's a CODA. So there was a scene with Mr. V where he's teaching her how to read music. And he's kind of describing all the musical terms on the page. And he says, CODA, this is the CODA. And she says, oh, that's the name for what I am. Right. And I ended up cutting the scene because I didn't think I needed it. But I remember being delighted when I sort of realized how music played such a key moment in the movie, a key element in the movie, how it was about the end of childhood and, the idea that this is kind of the CODA to her childhood or the story. I really loved that. And then I don't remember who I told first, but I'm like, oh, I love this idea of calling it CODA. And they were like, that sounds like a Disney movie about like a sled dog. And I was like, shit, that's like not what I want to go for with this. But I kept it. Yeah, CODA, the feistiest dog at the front of the right.
So next question is so how did you immerse yourself in deaf culture? How did you make sure that you're going to represent this community? Really the way you did.
Yeah, I mean, I had to go make deaf friends, which was, I had just started. I mean, I think my first thing that I wanted to do was start learning the language, because I knew how much of the dialogue was going to be in ASL and how much I wanted ASL to play a role in the story. So in a way, I was like, I just need to make as many contacts within the deaf community as I can at first. And it really was just reach Elliot Page, who I'd worked with on Tallulah, had a friend, Hillary Back. And I reached out to Hillary and just was like, can I take you to coffee and, just chat with you and just discuss the story and hear your thoughts. And then I just loved her so much, and we connected and made each other laugh. And I told her I was looking for an ASL teacher, and she kept trying to find me a teacher, but we kept hanging out and having coffee. And finally I was like, can you just teach me ASL while we're having coffee? Because I really like hanging out with you. So she kind of started teaching me, and then I started going to Deaf West plays, and would be just shamelessly hanging out afterwards. And I went up to the artistic director, DJ Kurz, and introduced myself. And that's where I first saw Troy Kotzer on stage, was in a Deaf West play. And he was in that play with another actor, Russell Harvard. And I went up and met Russell. I mean, I think I was just, and it was kind of crazy too, because I just couldn't sign very well at that point too. So I was, just like, I'm gonna make this work, and figure out, and in some settings, like at Deaf West, there was often someone there who could interpret. But yeah, or, it was like, oh, I have a friend who has a friend and you guys should meet. And I'm gonna, I was just emailing people and reaching out, and then being like, hey, can you read the script? Or, hey, what do you think of this idea? Or does this premise sit right with you? And because there's a saying in the deaf community, which I think is the right saying for any marginalized community, being, which is nothing about us without us. And it was really important to me that I was a hearing person. I was an outsider. If I was going to be the person to be the conduit for this story, I had to make sure that I had a team around me at every stage. When I was brainstorming on what the story should be, through to writing, through to the translation, then being on set. I wanted deaf eyes behind the camera with me as well. In the edit, I made sure that I was never alone in the process, because it's also hard, I think, when you are finding collaborators, but you really have to empower people too, to be able to have a voice in the process, and not just kind of be there. I do see something happening now with consultants, where you kind of bring in the consultant from the community, but they're not actively, creatively a part of the process. They're stepping away. And I think that can be problematic.
Yeah, it sounds like,
also,
oh, sorry. It sounds
I would say also having multiple viewpoints, having more than one person, because I think it's very hard for one person to speak for a community and be like, hey, can you tell me what deaf people think about this? And it's like, how one person can never represent every personal experience is different. So I think having multiple perspectives, having a team, having many different people weighing in was really helpful for the process.
Yeah. Great. Well, yeah, thanks for that. So now I think we're going to get into the script. So our Enid is going to put up page 1 of the CODA script. So let's wait for that real quick. And then, we're going to get into your writing. So here's page 1. They're out in the water. We meet Ruby. We don't know that they're deaf yet at this point. And can you talk a little bit about this moment, why start the movie here? The description and introducing us to this character. Basically, why start at this point, and what was your intention with this beginning?
Well, it was very visual. The landscape and the place is really a character in the movie to me, and it makes these people who they are. I would say that, the Rossies are as much defined by being a fishing family as they are by being deaf. Like, it's culturally, I mean, even like that livelihood of being out on the water, and the environment on that boat is so specific and so interesting and visual that I really wanted to just identify this family as who they were. They're hard scrabble, hardcore fishing family. This is one of the most dangerous jobs out there. And when you're out there on that boat and you kind of see the process and you see that net come up with the fish and you see kind of the machinery and the seagulls that are surrounding the boat, it was just a very visual, exciting way to start. And I also love the idea that we meet Ruby in this kind of contradictory moment where she's wearing these fishing grundens and she's doing this incredibly intense job, and yet she's belting out this song as she does it, and no one gives a shit. Like, her brother and father are kind of in their work and they're all working together, and that she can be having a private moment even in the midst of being so tightly compacted on this boat together and working side by side. So I like that. And I like, starting with the ocean was an amazing visual. And I think the character, the Angela Rose, which was the boat that we used, but I knew those boats. I'd spent a lot of time in Gloucester and I'd been out on those fishing boats. And so starting on the boat and meeting the boat as a character too was really important to me.
All right.
Got it. So we'll go now to page 3. And I just want to zero in on the note about American Sign Language and the ASL being in italics. Did you find some kind of precedent for this type of formatting, or how did you decide to format the ASL in the script this way?
I didn't. I mean, I think, I've done this in the past. Like, I show run Little America on Apple, and we have a lot of foreign languages, and sometimes the easiest thing to do is put it in italics. I think what I liked about it is sort of the process that the language underwent. As I was learning ASL, I think the first thing I did is I wrote in English and just put it in italics without a thought about how concepts are presented in ASL, how thoughts are formed, how, just how it's such a different language from English. So there was something interesting about that. It was a process for me. Like, the first step was like writing in English how I've always written and just kind of putting it in italics. But then through learning the language, through the work I did with my ASL masters, Alexandria Wales and Ann Tomasetti, to do the translation, the English had to change in order to represent these concepts in the way that you would communicate them in ASL. So those scenes in a way probably changed the most because they were ongoing, and you'd sort of, I'd sit with Alexandria and we'd talk about a line, and then she would show me the signs for that line. And I'd say, oh, is there a better sign for that feels, more angry or more like physically engaged? And so she would kind of go, well, what about this sign? And then I'd go, great, I love that sign. Okay, now I'm going to go change the line to reflect the sign that I want. So there was a real interplay with the ASL between understanding how it was going to be presented visually on screen and what that meant about the word choice in the line and how the word then needed to change. It was amazing. It was an amazing experience of language.
Yeah.
And humor. And I would say, for people that don't know ASL or understand, these lines are not what you're seeing signed on screen. Because the way that ASL is a completely different sentence structure, totally different grammar, the way that concepts are presented, there's no there's no a, there's no all these articles that we use. You know, where the question comes is different from where it would come in English. So in a way, I knew these would be the subtitles, but they're not always a match with what's being signed and how it's being signed.
Right.
Fascinating.
For instance, this is interesting.
Mhm.
Like in deaf culture, you're not saying people's names all the time, or dad and mom the way that we would say it.
Mm.
So she doesn't say I love you, daddy. She just says I love you, like as she's leaving to her dad, but she's not saying dad. So there's things that are in the script that I think once we started, it was almost like, well, I'll leave that in the script or I'll leave it in the subtitle, but it's not actually going to be the line that's on the screen.
It's like a story. Yeah, that makes sense.
And like shitface and twat waffle, I mean, we're so much fun because I'm like, what, like I wrote these lines, but then I'm like, how are we going to sign twat waffle? And we would kind of play around on set. And, you know, there were like so many different ways we could have done that. And I remember Daniel came up with like twat, which is very visual for, and then waffle, which is this for waffle. But then at one point when he did the line, he did like twat waffle, but then he like cut the waffle and he like took a bite with his fork. And I was like, no, it's your sister. Your sister. That's weird. Like, don't eat the waffle. Like, just stick with the signs for twat waffle. But like eating the waffle is like a step too far. So I think we were always playing also with like the signs versus the word choice as well.
All right. So moving in a slightly different direction, we'll move to page 4.
I like forcing our ASL interpreter to do all of these signs right now. It's really
right.
Sorry, Carrie. So here on page 4, we're really kind of meeting Ruby. She's late. She's sleeping in class. She used to talk in a deaf voice. She smells like fish. And I just want to talk about establishing like empathy and a connection with Ruby. And can you speak to kind of getting us on board with her on the page?
I think so much of it was honestly about like the reality of what these fishing families are dealing with when you are going out on the boat. I mean, these guys get up at 3 a.m. and they're out on the water by 4, you know, and they're coming back in. Like the idea that she could have this entire morning before she even started her school day, and that this kid is exhausted by the time she gets to school, but that's how invested she is in the family and in their business and in being a part of it, that school is like this thing she has to put up with. And so I thought that was interesting, like this idea that she's having to lead almost this double life where she's as engaged as she is with the family business, that she is going out on the boats, but then she's showing up at school in the same stinky Bruins sweatshirt that she was wearing out on the boat, and kids can smell it on her. And I think there is a divide in this town, having hung out there a lot. You know, Gloucester's a very working class town, and it came up with these fishing families and with that industry. It's also beautiful. So it's become this kind of touristy place that it's close enough to Boston that people are moving there as this, like, you know, whether it's second homes or whether it's like the summer people who then buy houses there. So there is a like rich poor thing that happened in the town in a hardcore way. And so the idea that Ruby is from that side of it, but within the same school, there are kids there like Miles, who comes from a very different background from her, and doesn't necessarily understand what she's dealing with on a daily basis. So I think it was, a lot of this was from kind of hanging out in the town and like witnessing these class divides, and really wanting to establish which class she was in terms of the social hierarchy for her within school. And that home is her safe place and school is not.
Right.
And that, you know, I think for a lot of CODAs who grow up with ASL culture and like within deaf culture, because not all CODAs do, but that is where they feel comfortable. Oftentimes ASL is their first language and English is their second language. Like they're almost more comfortable in the deaf community than they are in the hearing community. So I really wanted to establish this feeling of like the personality Ruby has at home, which is actually super confident and super kind of in her own body. When she gets to school, there's another person there.
Right.
And that she's kind of playing these, or she's living as these two different characters.
You definitely established it. That's for sure. Cool. So let's move on to page 7. So she has to go to the doctor, with them. And this is something that I think, like my parents didn't speak English when I grew up. And so I can totally relate to this kind of situation. But it leads me to this point where like, there's clearly no boundaries in this family, right? And maybe out of necessity or out of whatever. But did you develop that dynamic, or did you just make that up, or was that part of like how you found families like that to be?
I mean, these are kind of my parents. My parents have no boundaries. They're completely out of line. They say whatever. I remember being like getting in trouble at school at a very young age for saying the word fuck. And they were like, well, what would your parents say if they heard you talk like this? And I'm like, this is how my parents talk. Like, this is where I learned this. I just think, I have artist parents. My mom like painted me red and put me on the subway in a performance piece when I was 6 years old. Like when my best friend grew boobs and came over to my house, my mom walked up and like poked her boobs and we're like, are those real? And I was like, what are you doing? So I think when I started to talk to CODAs, and a lot of CODAs described to me, there's a bluntness in deaf culture where you just say, oh, look, you've gained weight, to the person that you're talking to, or you kind of say exactly what you're thinking or feeling. And that can be hearing people are often taken aback by that bluntness. So when I was talking to these CODAs and they were describing this thing, I was like, wow, that's my family. Like, I really relate to that. I really relate to, culturally kind of people coming to my house and being like, wow, I can't believe your parents just said that out loud in front of, and I think because maybe they're immigrants and because there were not the same kind of, I don't know, it was just a different energy in my house. And so, and then also I'm like that. I mean, my husband calls me Shawnee Too Far because I truly cross the line all the time. And I have a really hard time engaging what's appropriate in what setting. And so I think there was also a little bit of me in Frank and Jackie. But yeah, I mean, this was so much fun to write. Like, it's so gross to
right.
boiled lobster claw line. I'm like, what could be the most mortifying thing that he could be talking about now in front of Ruby? And then of course, Troy, when he started signing this, I mean, was up to all kinds of hijinks. At one point, like he had a lighter in his pocket and he took it out, and the line, like, my nuts are on fire, he like ran the lighter under my nuts. And I was just like, I don't know, like, where's the line here? But it was a lot of fun to write. And then it was like even more fun, I think, when we started signing it.
I bet.
Because, and it's the storyteller that Troy is too, because the line is like a boiled lobster claw. But when Troy signed it, like, he was the lobster, then he dropped the lobster in the pot and he did like the bubbling in the pot and he did the whole thing. So it's like taking what I wrote and then riffing on it even further. And that was the fun part of this.
That's interesting.
In keeping with humor here, let's go down to page 9. And I think my favorite line in the movie is, why God made farts smell. And can you just talk about the genesis of that line?
Well, part of it was like looking at like deaf culture and like what's funny, like what are deaf jokes, like what are and like it's so great. I mean, Troy I wrote this long before I met Troy, but this couldn't be a more Troy joke, like just in terms of the kind of humor about sending up hearing people as well. Like, you know, we've been on all these talkbacks and there's microphone issues and Troy is like hearing people problems. Like, I don't give a shit about. And I feel like this joke, I'm trying to remember where it came from. I feel like it came from me just like hanging out and trying to figure out like, what are jokes about deaf culture and like that difference. But then also I will say about humor in general, I think there was a transition for me when we talked about my journey and like being self-taught, where sometimes your weirdest thought, that's like the thought that you would judge and maybe not put in the script, like those are the funniest moments. And honestly, I wrote on Orange is the New Black for 3 seasons, and there were so many times, I think that whole show for me was a lesson in like the weirdest parts of me, like the kind of weirdest, most quirky thought that I have is often the one that is like and it was a big lesson on Orange, not to digress off this, but like, I remember one of the first episodes, or the first episode I wrote, I had a line for Crazy Eyes where she said, "I threw my pie for you." And I remember writing that line and being like, that's a real weird thing to say. Like after this big blow up fight scene in the cafeteria, to be like turned to Piper and say, "I threw my pie for you." And I remember then the show came out and like, I questioned that line. Like I almost deleted it like 4 different times because I was like, is it funny? Is it only me that thinks this is funny? And then it was like on t-shirts, there were mugs, there were like there was that "I threw my pie for you" truck in New York that was like, and I was like, okay, that's such a lesson in like, keep your weirdest thought in the script.
Absolutely.
It might be the funniest. Yeah.
Awesome.
So I think we're gonna move on to page 10. So Bernardo, the teacher. So here's my question about him. So his dialogue in particular, I've seen him in other roles, obviously, big fan, and it sounds like that's how he talks. Is that something that came because he came on board and you worked with him, or did you just have that dialogue already? Because it really sounds like that's who he is.
I wrote it for him to get him.
Oh, wow.
So I like targeted him, and then I wrote, actually, originally the character was a woman, a teacher in an early draft of the script. And I knew I wanted like just a really charismatic person who could be funny and also felt like an outsider in this community. Gloucester's really white. And so the idea of, you know, a Mexican guy in Gloucester was also just really interesting to me in terms of his point of connection with Ruby and feeling like an outsider a bit in that town. So I think it was my casting director first that was like, "Do you know Eugenio Derbez?" And I was like, "Oh, he's really interesting." And I went and watched his work. And then I was like, to get him, wow, I need to write this character for him.
Right.
So I did. I wrote it with him in mind. And then he passed the first time. So then I was like, I just wrote the script for you. Like, now who else am I going to get that can be this guy? Because I was like, the guy was so him at that point, right, that exactly like you said, like, this is his voice.
Yeah.
That then I was like, who's out? Like, am I going to go to like Antonio Banderas? Like who could play Mr. V besides him? And then we ended up like strong arming him into the movie. So that was good because it was
well, great job. I mean, that's yeah. Great. So I think page 11, basically this is just a note that great way to sort of run through the page and maybe run through when you were directing. Stiff girl, deep voice boys, you know, like you're just like it's, you don't have to describe all the characters, you know, you just get them really quick. And I think it's just, we love to see that in scripts. It's so economical, you know what I mean? And it just, your eyes just kind of go down the page. But then so then page 12, the quarry, we're wondering like, how did you come up with the place like that for Ruby to for that to be her spot, where she goes to find some solace for herself.
So the quarry was written for, I grew up going up to Gloucester in the summers, and I was from Cambridge, and I used to go cliff jumping off this quarry. So when I was like 14, 15, I would sneak through the woods with my friends because it was like a private quarry and you couldn't get in there unless you were like somehow a resident member. So we knew when the security guard would be there, and we would sneak through the woods and we would go cliff jumping off these cliffs. And what I loved about my memories of it was it's the most epic looking place. I mean, those massive granite walls with the woods around, and those quarries are like 100 feet deep. So when you're swimming in them, you just feel like, what's even down there? Like, it's a really wild experience. And there was always a telephone pole floating in it that you could run on and play on. Like when I was a kid, I just remember all of us like jumping off the things and then like laying on this log, and the log would kind of roll and you try to stay on it. One of the best memories of growing up, honestly. So, and that this incredible visual place could be totally feel secret. Like that was the most amazing thing, that like, because no one was really allowed in there, you felt like you were the only people that knew about it, or the people who had discovered it. So I wrote it for the quarry, for Siân Heder Quarry. And then of course we couldn't shoot there because it was a private quarry and they wouldn't end up letting us in to shoot. And you can't sneak through with, 100% through in the same way that you can as a teenager. So we ended up finding, there are a lot of these quarries in Gloucester that are equally epic. But I loved that it was such a specific landscape that I'd never seen anywhere else except this town. It was an old, it's actually in Rockport. It's not in Gloucester. And it was a rock town. That was their export. So they dug out the quarry rock, and they would, it was also a port town, so they could ship it out. And it's just a visual I've never seen anywhere else, and was so specific to the place. And I remember when they were trying to pressure me to go shoot in Canada because it was cheaper, I was like, no, because I had this quarry in my mind. Also, the acoustics are amazing. And the first time Amelia sang Happy Birthday there, it was a really incredible thing. But I think,
yeah, you're right.
Metaphorically too, I mean, there was something about the age that I was going and jumping off those cliffs, and they're really high. They're 40 feet high. And I remember standing on the edge all day long, trying to get myself to jump off. And really, it's the time that Ruby's at in her life, like that being at the precipice of something and sitting on the edge and not knowing what's going to happen when you step off the edge, and the precariousness of kind of being right there and safe on land, but then right there is this kind of unknown space. So I loved the jumping and the quarry also as a metaphor for where she's at in her life.
Right. Wow.
So moving to page 13, right at the top of this page, Frank says, if we lose that boat, we got nothing. And this is kind of like a catalytic point where right when Ruby starts to dip her toe into independence, her family's problems suddenly become weightier. I just want to know how you plotted this and kind of mapped this out. Maybe we covered it with the cards. I don't know.
No, I mean, I think that there's something about being a kid where like adult problems, like you're kept out of adult problems kind of. And I think what's interesting is that Ruby is so aware of, like, she's so in the middle of it, right? Because she's translating for everything. So CODAs are often kind of in the mix way more than they should be as children, because they're in adult conversations that they shouldn't be. What I loved about this moment is this is not an adult conversation that's shared with her via her interpreting or whatever. Her parents are having a private conversation and she's witnessing it from the other room. And I really wanted to put Ruby in a vice grip in this movie and put pressure on her from both sides that keeps growing and keeps squeezing her. and that those tensions are kind of equally balanced and pulling on her in equal force as the movie goes along, and more intensely as the movie goes along. So I think it's almost like she's been up till this point, like kind of aware that they're not making the money they should and blah, 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 blah. But I think for me early on, to just establish the stakes for this family of what's going on, that this is their livelihood. This is the only thing, he says right before that, this is the only thing I know how to do. And seeing her parents in this moment of vulnerability that they're actually keeping from her. They're not intentionally applying this pressure. This is a child witnessing a moment she probably shouldn't have witnessed, but raising her internal stakes of, this is not the moment to leave my family when they are actually in crisis with their livelihood. So that was important for me to establish early in the script. And the next scene was the scene of her watching her dad on the boat, and the way she's looking at him has changed. Yeah. Because I think she saw him as this provider, and he's this big, tough guy, and he's kind of got it all together. And suddenly that's shifted for her, and she's seeing this vulnerable side of her dad, and it's scary.
Yeah. So let's go down to page 18. And another great line where Gertie tells the brother that she has herpes. And, can you just kind of talk about the inspiration for Gertie and how she developed as a character?
I mean, Gertie is just like so many girls that I grew up with. Like, Gertie is just that friend who's like way more sexually advanced than you. And like Ruby has her first kiss in the movie. Like Gertie's like having sex with teachers, like there's a whole different vibe going on. But what I loved about this moment is also there was just like, as I was learning sign, there were just so many funny, like the line at the end of the movie where he says, nice to meet you, and says, nice to fuck you. Like that was fully a mistake that I made early on when I was learning sign language, because this is me and this is fuck. Like, it's just like one finger up or two. So these things started to infuse the script, and all the time I would be trying to sign something and signing something else. And so I love this moment of like Gertie thinking that she's like super hot and like hitting on Leo, and instead confesses that she's got an STD. So, but so much of the humor was coming out of like knowing the interplay of the visual language and how funny it can be when you're sort of getting it wrong.
Right. And going on to page 23, I love this moment with Frank smoking a joint. And there's this great synergy between, Ruby and her dad and her parents generally. The fact that they're just kind of these like horny hippies, and she's just constantly mortified just creates this great like friction. And that kind of, it goes well beyond, her being hearing and then being deaf. And can you kind of talk about like creating that contrast?
Again, it's like totally me and my family as a kid. I mean, I was just way more conventional than my parents. Like I was like, put clothes on, my friends were over. Like, it was just, I think that dynamic, which I just love, of like being the teenager who's, and I will say, like, I grew up in Cambridge, and I think the vibe was like a lot of my friends called their parents by their first names. And, I remember like someone's dad, like coming down, we were smoking weed in the basement, and like, we were all like, oh my God, are we busted? And he was like asking for half the weed, like, so I think a lot of it too was like the way that I grew up in the community that I grew up in, which was very like, there wasn't this like parental child thing. It was kind of like everybody's on the same page. And I liked seeing this family as like this weird group of friends, like that it almost wasn't like parent child. It was like, here's my dad who smokes pot, and here's my mom who's like in everybody's business and wants to force me into wearing makeup, and I don't want to, but like that it's a boundaryless family. And that's super important in the script, because I think that dynamic you can be a very loving, very functional family and at the same time be messy and boundaryless and dysfunctional. And the interplay of those two things, this family is boundaryless in terms of, and Leo sees it more clearly. Like his parents, or the parents in the movie should have set a stricter boundary with Ruby, and they didn't. But also they're boundaryless people. It's not about them being deaf. It's about the fact that everybody has messy boundaries in this film, including Ruby. I mean, Ruby is inserting herself all kinds of places, which is none of her business. I love the scene where she actually goes to the fish auction and Leo is doing fine. He's got his iPad out. He's negotiating with the guy. He's got it. And she just butts in and starts intervening. And it was important to me that everyone in this family is boundaryless. Like Ruby is getting a lot of self-confidence from this thing that she also considers a burden, and she is kind of hanging on to it in a weird way, because I think she doesn't know what lays out there in the world for her, and she knows exactly who she is and how important she is within her family. So I think playing with boundaries all through the movie and the messiness of boundaries was important. And part of that is your dad smoking a joint in public when you wish he wouldn't.
Cool. So we're going to move on to page 26. So obviously this feels like an act break. This is now the idea of her actually going to college is introduced. And it's the thing that, will take her away from the family. But then on page 28, she tells her mom, right, that she joined the choir. Jackie's dismissive. Now we just noticed that in the writing, every scene is just hugely economical. You just get in, get out, and you do it. You do what you're supposed to do, and then and they're great. But did you, in your earlier drafts, did you write scenes longer? Like you always? You see. Okay. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
I think one of the things I talked about earlier, how it was a coming of age for everybody. And one of the things I do when I'm writing is I'll pull a character out of the script. I'll pull out just Mr. V, and those scenes, it's so easy to do in Final Draft too. And I'll kind of read it. If this is a movie about Mr. V and these are the scenes of Mr. V's journey, what is that movie by itself outside of the script? And I did it with Jackie, and I did it with Frank, and I did it with Mr. V. And one of the things that happened, of course, is you start to oh, well, now I really see what Mr. V's story is. I got to meet his family. I got to know why he's here. I got to know, that he used to be in a band in Mexico and it didn't succeed here. And that's how he ended up teaching. And you kind of get all this information about a character. I generally put it in the script.
Right.
And then either I then realize as I'm rewriting and doing drafts, I actually don't need that information, or it's there, we shoot it. And then later you're Mr. V was interesting. We did have a scene where you met his family and his wife and his kid. And it's you go and you shoot the scene and you realize I don't need to meet them. I see the kid's toys in his living room.
Right.
I know he has a family. He's got a line, I've got a whole life that's got nothing to do with you. And I see a dollhouse in the background and I have all the information I need. I actually don't need a scene where I see that he has a family because I've been given that visual. Sometimes when you're writing, you almost don't know.
Right.
You're not picturing the dollhouse in the background. Yeah. So you're how are we going to know this? So yeah, I think, and like I said, as I was working on the ASL, a lot of those scenes I think shrunk because so much is expressed non-verbally.
Right.
So much is on people's faces. It's in an expression, it's in body language. It's not necessarily that you're signing every thought. And I loved in this, that Jackie Ruby says this thing about joining the choir, and Jackie's a narcissist. For Jackie, everything kind of is about her.
Right.
And this moment where she kind of laughs and rolls her eyes says everything, because I'm like, you've just shared this thing with your parent, and there's a dismissiveness in their physicality. And then when you question that dismissiveness, she makes a joke.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
you know, if I was blind, would you want to paint? And to me, like, so much of the dynamic with your family is like the shit that nobody's saying, but everybody's feeling.
Yeah.
Like, I just shared this thing with my mom, and then Ruby says, why is it always about you? And like, to me, they say everything with those two lines. It could be expanded, and they could go on and get into like the dynamic of their relationship where Jackie makes everything about her, but she's just proved that she did, because she sort of made this love of Ruby's suddenly about a reaction to Jackie's deafness.
Right.
So I think the economy also comes from like, when you start to really understand your characters, they don't have to say as much.
Right.
Right.
Because it's being played in subtext. It's not being played in the line.
Yeah, that's a great point. No, because we also heard that you cut like some 30 some scenes, right?
Yeah.
And which speaks to what you're saying. Can you give a couple examples of like what kind of things that you cut, besides the, like the family thing and all that?
Yeah. So Mr. V had a bigger story. You kind of got a little bit more into Mr. V's background and his life and what he was doing there. I think it became really clear to me that this was just a movie about this family. And that in a way, Mr. V was there to be the other force working on Ruby, but it didn't need to be about him. It was like sort of how he affects her. There was a lot more with the fishing. There was a lot more about kind of what the town is going through. And the problem is I'm a really nerdy researcher. And so I was in Gloucester with the Gloucester Fishermen's Wives Association. I was going to town hall meetings and listening to these fishermen talk. So I was like, this is screwed up what's happening here. Like, Noah is not talking to the fishermen before they're making these regulations, and the big corporations can continue to fish while the family fishermen's getting screwed. And I'm so passionate about it at this point that it's all like going into this script. And I remember Lionsgate when it was still at a studio, and then they got like an early draft, and they were like, I don't think anyone cares about the fishing the way that you do. You're right. Like, all this fishing can go. There was a whole Leo Gertie love story that we ended up cutting too, which was much more about, there was an amazing scene, a sex scene with Leo and Gertie, where he's teaching her all the signs for the sexual positions that they're in. Like, it was a very funny scene, and Ruby walks in, it's like horrible. And then she has to have this family dinner with Gertie, where she is trying to give Gertie a sign name, and she keeps calling her like brother fucker. And
right.
And again, like, and there was an interesting thing where then they break up, and Ruby assumes that it's because Gertie, dumped him because he was deaf, and it turns out he dumped her. And it's kind of another moment of Ruby like readjusting, like, oh, I'm actually projecting a lot of shit onto my family, which is not true. So there were moments, but honestly, so much of it was about like, what is the story about? And yes, being succinct about it. And in a way, it needed an emotional purity of like, we're just tracking this family. We're just tracking this journey of this family trying to pull apart. And that's all it's about. And who cares about fishing regulations? Except the Fishermen's Wives Association in Gloucester, Massachusetts.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great process. And speaking of great writing, on page 30, this is just a comment about Mike, a meathead. Like, where Laura and I are always calling people meatheads, and
it's our favorite word, so we just have to call attention to it.
Word. It's just so like it. Exactly who this Mike guy is.
Well, I'm like not. It's so funny. I'm kind of obsessed with how your eye moves down the page when you read a script. And sometimes I feel like when you see these like big chunks of action, you're just like, oh, I don't. And oftentimes when I know I'm directing as well, it's like, it's almost like a note to myself of like what I want, but it's not, I'm not mostly reading my script to be read as a document. I'm reading it as a blueprint, I'm writing it as a blueprint for myself to go make the movie. So it's interesting. Like with the meathead, it's like, yeah, I actually don't give a shit if Mike is tall or short or how old he is. Like, it's just the vibe of that dude in the bar that's like hip checks you off his stool. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, that's just the vibe I want. And like, if Mike is that, then that's
very good. So let's get on to page 34. This is another I just love the line about Frank and Jackie freeze like busted teenagers, which I feel like we've covered pretty adamantly. But my other question, if we go down to page 37, I just want to know how you landed on like You're All I Need to Get By and Both Sides Now and these other pivotal songs in the script. And also, did you listen to music while you wrote this movie?
So music was hugely important in the movie, and I knew it was. I also knew that it was an indie movie. And what's interesting, like it started as a studio movie. So I wrote a lot of big songs into the script that then we became an indie movie, and I was never going to get those songs. You're All I Need to Get By was something I wrote in the script because it had to serve so many narrative purposes. It needed to be this song that she sings with her, this boy she likes in the bedroom, and they kind of have this romantic moment too. And then it needed to transform and be lyrically relevant when she sings it to her father, like on the back of the truck. Like it kind of had to fulfill all these different purposes. And it's super hard to find a duet that is just not god awful and cheesy.
Right.
I went down a lot of bad duet roads trying to find that. And so I was so attached to that song, and you hear it 5 times in the movie. And I was also like, it's got to be a great song that you want to hear over and over again as well. And then with a lot of the music, because I didn't know who our actress was, it was like, how are we going to find something that fits her voice and suits her and complements what she can do actually? And when I cast Amelia, things like Etta James, I mean, she had never had a singing lesson. She was not comfortable belting. She didn't have a big voice like that. So those were scary songs for her. Both Sides Now, I didn't have that written in the script. It was Landslide by Stevie Nicks, which is a song that I love and was lyrically very poignant, but almost too on the nose. Like even when I wrote it in the script, it was kind of I've been afraid of changing because I built my life around you. And it was like, it's exactly what's happening. So even when I put it in the script, it was a placeholder to me of like, I need to find out, because she's singing that song as her audition at the end. She's also talking to her family in that song, and whatever she's saying in that moment is really important. So it's so hard to find it. And we kept looking, and again, we had no money. And so then I was working with my music supervisor and my music producer, and we just kept going through songs. And I remember we were sitting around a table, and I don't know if it was Alex or Nick. I should give one of them credit for this, but I'll give it to both of them because I don't remember. What about Joni Mitchell? What about Both Sides Now? And I said, that is one of my favorite songs in the world. We'll never get it. Like, I'm not even going to entertain it because don't make me fall in love with that song. We're never going to be able to use it. But it's perfect because it's about perspective. It's about, CODAs having to look at things through hearing eyes and through deaf eyes. It's about, Joni Mitchell has talked about that song as being the end of her childhood, that it marked, when adult reality finally set in and she had to look back and say goodbye to childhood fantasy. So lyrically, it's amazing. Vocally, it's amazing. It was a little scary that it was so iconic that I was like, am I setting up this actress to fail? Because nobody's going to sing it the way that Joni Mitchell did.
Right.
But as we were looking at it, and then I heard the record, there was the original recording that Joni did, and then there's a recording she did at like 60 or when she was like in her 60s. And the song is a completely different song. Like she's lived this whole life and she's singing from this place of like regret and loss, and the song has transformed. So I also loved that the song could morph, and it had been shown that it could become all these other things. And then we got it, and it was perfect.
Wow.
So it was one of those things that like that was a collaboration, because I couldn't find it in the writing. I kept trying different songs there, and it was never quite right. And then it was just a beautiful thing together.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I think so let's go to page 39. So all the scenes, with choir, I had choir in high school, and they're so realistic. Like that's exactly what teachers say. I'm falling asleep here. I'm doing this. And like, so did you have any experience in choir yourself? How did you come up with this?
I can't sing at all. I am the worst singer you've ever heard in your life. Like just the worst. So the music scared me in this movie. But I went to drama school, and I went to conservatory drama school. And so I had teachers messing with me all the time like this, shouting at me, like, whatever they're doing to try to get you to unleash or unlock or kind of, and so being at Carnegie Mellon when I was 18 years old and having some acting teachers scream at me that I was, not some little girl from Cambridge anymore or whatever, to try to get an emotional reaction out of me. I was like really familiar with this dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And did a lot of voice training, like voice and speech and voice training. So I knew kind of sometimes that work that you're doing in that way. But also it was just really fun we used a real choir in the film. And so there was an interesting process of, I called the teacher who was the inspiration for this character when I was writing it, who was actually my English teacher in high school. And I called up Donald and started talking to him about the script and just students. And I think I just had teachers in my life that I could pull on for this character. It was kind of a combination between Donald and my drama teacher in high school, Jerry Specca, and I kind of like mashed them up, and it was drawing from those breakthrough moments where when you feel like a teacher is pushing you and they get at something bigger, it's like a therapy session underneath the lesson that's being taught.
Right.
So a lot of it was like pulling from my own life and experiences, and then also research of like calling up, the music teachers at Carnegie Mellon and going like, how do you unlock someone's voice, and what kinds of things are you doing? I mean, I don't know if this is a procrastination tool or if it's just how I like to work. Every time I have a scene that's involving anything I don't know, I tend to like reach out to somebody who's done that or from that world. I mean, like I said, I'm hanging out with the fishing community. I went out on fishing boats, but also I'm calling up, the old vocal coaches from Carnegie Mellon where I went to school and going like, can you walk me through exercises that you're doing with your students, and like in moments like what happens when someone's voice breaks through, or what is it about when someone's voice can't. And I really liked that Ruby was made fun of for her voice when she was a kid. So there's kind of trauma around that. And therefore, when she's asked to unleash her voice, that's like, there are these wounds that you have as a kid that you're carrying around that prevent you from connecting in the way you should when you're trying to be an artist sometimes. And so having a teacher able to put that in a language that a kid can understand and get them there was an interesting.
Because it also allows her to flourish just in life general.
Yeah.
I think it's a two-way thing. So no, that's brilliant.
So let's go down to page 41. And at this point in the story, the vice is getting tighter since the family is, planning to go off on their own in terms of the business. They need Ruby now more than ever. And I just want to know, what does a turning point like this look like in your outline or in your development process?
I think it was looking at, for me, it was like I said, like Ruby's at the center, and on one side is pulling her family obligations, and those feel tied into what's happening in the fishing community and what's happening with their livelihood. And on the other side is kind of the discovery of her talent, but then the pressure on her to fulfill on, you know, that talent and to, I mean, this is a working class family, and I don't think anyone's even thought about the idea of college. I think, you know, Frank is a high school dropout. Like, he worked on his dad's boat. Like, this is not, I think for a lot of families, it's not even about deaf or hearing. It's about like being a working class family where that's not something that you do go to college. You're done with high school and you go work on the boat. And I also feel like the setting was very important. And I have to say this, like, the access to interpreters, if you're in New York or LA, or if you have means, is way more than if you're in a small town like this and you're poor. So I think that was important as well, is like, I definitely didn't want to say that this is something that all CODAs are doing. This is about accessibility in this town, and the fact that this family is isolated because of where they live and because of their financial means. And they're trying to change that through starting this co-op. They're trying to get on their feet. They're trying to be independent and not under the thumb of these auction houses and these guys that are basically robbing them. So it's like, in trying to solve one problem, they're actually creating a need for Ruby that's even more high stakes. So it's kind of about like, okay, can I pile on here? And then let me pile on here to sort of ramp up the stakes of, you know, Mr. V going, okay, if you're actually serious about this, I'm giving up my time to do this with you. And I need a kind of commitment, at the same time that her family's going, we're trying to save our livelihood and we're trying to save our world. And we're actually doing this for you. And we need you to be a part of it, not forever, but for right now. It's like the timing of this is terrible. So I needed to create a kind of, you know, highly tense situation purely based on the circumstances that are happening on either side.
Right.
I don't know if that answers your
But
Yes, yeah, it does.
But I also feel, it also feels like you did that, but also in a very organic way, that it doesn't feel like it's, you know, manipulated, or, you know, it's that's the trajectory that we're going on, and it, or naturally that's going to happen, that vice.
Well, and I think sometimes the research like just provides you with an idea that solves the problem that you have. Like, when I started talking to these Gloucester fishermen and I'm like, this sucks, like what would help? And they're like, oh, well, actually part of the problem is like these middlemen and the fact that this is all controlled. Like, we have no autonomy over what we're doing or how we're doing it. And these kind of like the idea like of co-ops and kind of like we could do this ourselves.
Right.
But inherent in that idea is like, oh shit, we're going to have to like interact a lot with the hearing community. We're going to need Ruby more as we're on our feet. And so then I'm like, well, that's the right idea then, because it's the thing that they're doing to save themselves. And yet, as you said, organically, not superficially, it's actually inherent in the idea of doing that is the fact that they need to be able to communicate more than ever. Right. So it's those things that I'm looking for, I think, as I'm writing, which are both true and raise the stakes in a very interesting way.
Absolutely. So if we go down to page 43, some other lines that I really like those hearing bitches want nothing to do with me, and you hate people. And I like love Frank and Jackie so much. But out of all the characters, which character was the most fun to write for you?
I mean, Frank, like he's so fun because he's, you know, definitely fully my sense of humor. But Jackie was a riot to write because Jackie's a complicated person. Like she's really loving, but like I said, she's kind of a narcissist. Like she has trouble getting outside of her own experience, and she really grows up in the movie. So in terms of like someone having to change and I love that she's like those hearing bitches, and then at the end of the film you see that she's actually like found a way to joke and hang out with those same hearing bitches.
Right.
But there can be a defensiveness when you have been isolated by circumstance and your community has not engaged with you. There can be a defensiveness and a rejection of that same community. Right. And I think it's interesting to look at Frank and Jackie, and they are isolated because of their profession. Like they have to get up at 3 a.m. and they're working these weird hours, and it's easy to be isolated. And a lot of fishermen are very solitary because of what you're doing. Like you're out on the boat alone all day, and but that's almost something for Frank to hide behind too.
Right.
Like, well, it's easy to not engage because it's me on my boat alone, or it's me and my son alone. And I don't actually have to step outside my comfort zone. And if I don't want to go to the bar with those guys, I don't have to. Like I'm not in an environment. So it was kind of interesting to look at like, I love that Ruby is saying this here. It's like, yes, they have a deaf community who lives further away, and they do have bowling nights or whatever with them once a month. But like in their day-to-day life, they are not working on engaging with this community, but it's because the community hasn't worked to engage with them. So it's kind of this self-imposed isolation, but it's not self-imposed because there's not accessibility in this town.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Let's move on to page 59. And this is basically like, so here Ruby is like having a meaningful moment to herself, I think. Let's see, scroll down. Oh yeah, so she's with Miles. They're having a great time. And I think this is where they kiss for the first time, I believe. I can't remember, but
yeah.
But then on page 60, the next page, so there's a moment where we get the perspective. The dialogue fades out right here, and we can't watch the scene from Frank's perspective as Joanne explains that they're deaf. Can you talk about that choice because I think it happens a couple times in the script where we flip it and we see it from. Can you talk about like what you wanted to do by doing that?
I think with the juxtaposition of these two scenes, I mean, this is probably the climax in the film in terms of energetically. And I wanted Ruby to have the best day of her life at the same time that her family has the worst day of their life. Like I loved the cutting from this totally idyllic, amazing, sun-dappled, floating. And like I said, I talked about the log and the quarry that I had growing up. Like those are some of my best memories of like floating on a log in a quarry with the boy that you like. And this incredibly scary situation happening at the same time, which could have been avoided, honestly, if, and I love the messiness of like the fight that happens after this. Ruby says like, well, I can't be with you all the time. And Frank says, but you could have just told us that you weren't coming. Like there's all this there's a lot of missed, this idea. And I think we were playing with the character, with Amelia, but I was also in the writing looking at like in Ruby's mind, if she leaves, everything falls apart.
Right.
That's her biggest fear, right? Like if I take myself out of this equation, it's all going to go to shit. Mm. So at this kind of crucial moment, her case has been proved by this, right? Like I took myself out and it all went to shit, and my dad lost his license and the family is fucked because I chose myself for once. The reality is she's not acknowledging her own part in that, which is in the next scene. Frank says, all you needed to do was tell me that you weren't coming.
Right.
And we would have figured that out, but she didn't do that. So it's almost like this interesting passing of burden and blame. And like, but it was important to me that Ruby's having this psychological, like, when you make a case and you're just kind of looking for the information from the world to prove it. And she sort of gets that here, but it's not totally right because it was sort of her teenage flakiness of not communicating with her dad about what was going on. And then in terms of the sound going out, there were 3 places where I'd entertain the idea of the sound going out. One was in the bar when Leo gets in the fight and when he's trying to follow the hearing conversation at the table. The other was here. And the last was at the concert.
Right.
And I realized that it was going to get old if I did it 3 times and not have the impact that I wanted it to have. But yet I really wanted to be with Frank and Leo in this moment and understand how disorienting that is to have a run-in with law enforcement when you're deaf and you don't know what's happening. So in a way, this was a way to fix, like I was able to, by taking just the dialogue out, but keeping the sound and the music, I saved that impactful moment of silence for the concert. And yet you still got to be with Leo and Frank in how disorienting it is when you're left out of communication and you don't know what is going on.
Right.
So it was kind of, and sound was a really important thing for me in the movie because I knew it was all building toward this silent concert. So the way that I used sound through the rest of the movie felt very important. And that Ruby is the ears in her family. So when an environment, I probably built up the sound design way more than I would have in another film, in the sense that like when you're on the dock, you're hearing all the conversations happening on other boats. You're hearing all these little sounds are pulled out in the mix so that it's a very rich sound world. And when it goes away, has impact.
Yeah, I watched it with headphones and that's very true. I thought somebody was like next to me a few times. But yeah.
So let's go down to page 64. And oh my God, I love this scene. Can you talk about where this scene came from and also just talk about what it was like to write it? Because it just feels like your pen was on fire.
It was. I'm so glad you said that. This was like, this scene poured out of me and didn't change. Like out of everything else in the script. This was the audition scene for Jackie too. Like,
oh wow.
There was something, okay, first of all, this monologue that Jackie gives, when my daughter was born, they take them away immediately. And I remember that feeling being in the hospital, and they did the hearing test, and they did that where they put like these wires and electrodes all over her. And I remember like being totally panicked at being separated from her. Like as a newborn, I'm like, oh, this is not what a little baby who's just been put into the world should be going through. But when I imagined that moment for Jackie and the stakes of that, and also just, I think your biggest fear as a parent is that you won't connect with your kid. And, most deaf people have hearing kids, and most deaf people are born to hearing parents. And so this feeling of bridging across that gap is really common and is something that is dealt with a lot. And it depends on your background. Like Marley didn't have this with her parents. I remember Marley had a hard time with this scene because she was like, I never felt this separation with my mom, and I don't feel this separation with my kids who are CODAs. But other deaf people had shared with me that if you grow up in a household where you don't connect with your hearing parent, and they don't make an effort to sign, and they don't make an effort to give you communication, there can be a fear of that repeating.
Right.
And I think for Jackie, she has a deaf son. She's sort of in her world. She's built this family that feels very safe to her. And this idea of this other child entering the mix. And am I going to repeat what happened with my mom with my child, and the fear of that? And I love how blunt, again, like how blunt she is. Right. I mean, when Ruby says, do you ever wish I was deaf? I love the choice that's made in that moment, not to be like, oh no, honey, of course I love you just the way you are. It's also an acknowledgement of Ruby's like capacity to understand.
Yeah.
That she just says, yes, I did wish you were deaf, and this is why, instead of doing the mom thing, which is to be kind of, brush it aside or not have the conversation. And then again, also, I mean, I love this joke, honestly, that Ruby says, like, you're a bad mom for so many other reasons. Because I think the way we fail as parents is never the way we think we will, like, it's like you are going to fuck up your kids, but it's never in the way that you think. And also the total discomfort with having a talk like this with your mom. Like, when I was writing it, I remember being like, okay, so it's this incredibly intense moment on the bed, but Ruby's a teenager and a part of her would need to break that moment or make a joke or release the tension of the intensity, because I think we're never comfortable in these conversations when they're happening.
Totally.
And this is a family that copes with humor. So it just felt like it always needed to come in some way in these scenes, so that also they didn't get too heavy-handed.
Absolutely. So we've got a couple of minutes. We have 4 more questions. I think we can do it. We're going to do it.
Okay.
So let's go down to page 68. I just want to talk about the concert scene and what you as a writer, when you're writing this, what are you trying to accomplish?
I really wanted to just put the audience in the deaf perspective. And part of that, when you're around hearing people, is about being a detective.
Mm-hmm.
And this was shared with me by my deaf collaborators, who said, when I'm at Thanksgiving and I'm sitting around with my hearing family and no one's making an effort to include me, and I have to look around the room and get clues as to what is being talked about and what is happening. And I read someone's lips, but I only get one line, and then someone laughs over here and I look this way and I miss the other joke that was made. And so I loved, and also DJ Kurz, who was Deaf West, the artistic director of Deaf West. He produces a lot of musicals. And I remember him telling me, I watch the audience. Like, when we do these musical numbers, I look to the audience to understand how they're reacting and what's happening on stage. So for me, it was just really about this moment of being a parent, wanting desperately to connect to your kid and being left out of what's actually happening, and having to find your own way into it, which is through strangers, which is such a surreal thing.
Totally.
I always knew this was going to be like a purely visual scene, but I think I needed on the screen to kind of be inside of the experience so that everyone can read it and know how we need to shoot it and what it should feel like.
Right.
Got it.
So we're going to move on to pages 70 and 71, which is pivotal, right? This is where he puts his hand on her throat. And I mean, it's first of all, it's such a great payoff to the earlier scene when they're listening to rap music and it's vibrating on his ass. And what's amazing to me is that that's a comedic scene. And this is the most, I'm starting to cry right now.
Yeah,
this is the most touching like ever, and can you explain like was that a conscious like planting payoff? Can you play like that? Or do you want to talk a little bit about this scene?
I actually never really connected it to, I wish I could say it was brilliant, and like the rap scene with the ass vibrating was payoff for this. You're the smarter screenwriter than I am in connecting those two. No, this to me was really the payoff to the concert. Like, I really looked at this as a conversation with the concert scene.
Right.
The concert is always, like in movies, the trope of like the big moment where you've seen the song rehearsed and you finally get the moment. And I knew I wanted to take it away from the audience in the same way that it is not available to Frank and Jackie and Leo in that moment. And by taking it away, it took the emotion off that scene and put it onto this one. because this kind of, and this scene is never about, I think when I first started writing it, it was almost like from a hearing person's perspective of like, oh, it's like some magical transference of music. And somehow he kind of, by doing this, like gets what music is. And then I feel embarrassed even saying that now, because it was such a annoying hearing person's perspective on like the whole thing. And I think as I was becoming educated and exposed, I was like, this scene is not about that. This scene is about a dad trying to connect with his kid and a daughter trying to explain to her dad why she loves this thing, and the two of them working together as a team to try to connect. And it's not about music at all. Like, it's actually about closeness and intimacy. And like, that was a real key moment for me. But also, like, if I think about my journey of being educated and I think about why it's so important to question your own perspective, this scene was such an example of that.
Absolutely.
Like, where I originally thought it was coming from to where I ended up bringing it to was because I think I was aware that it just, I didn't want it to have that feeling that I.
Right. Well, also, it's very similar to the dramas that you mentioned that you wanted to kind of recreate in this. Have those moments, but just in dramatic, I love you, Dad, everything's forgiven, let's put our differences aside. It still has that feeling, but it just in such a fresh way,
I think because your parent might never understand what you do. And I think this is not, it's such a universal thing. It has nothing to do actually with, it's like, there are families of doctors and their kid wants to be an artist and they like don't get it. You know what I mean? And like, you don't actually have to get it as a parent. You just have to try. Like, and I think that was what was so important to me in this scene. Like, by Frank sitting there and saying, "Can you sing for me?" and him putting his hand on his daughter's neck, he's telling her that what's important to her is also important to him, even though he's never going to have the same experience of it. And that's like a massive gift to give to your kid.
Yeah.
And I think it's sort of like, I think what he does for Ruby in this scene is really important.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just, they see each other and they're both trying to meet in the middle.
Right. So
I think let's coast off the emotion of that into this one final question, which is, if we go down to the final pages 78 and 79, can you just talk about landing on the final moments of this film with Frank saying go and her coming back to give the family one last hug and signing "I love you forever"? How did that come about?
So I felt like when I wrote it, there were too many endings to the movie. Like, there were multiple endings. Like, it was like the Berkeley concert and then getting it, and then like, this goodbye with Miles and then, and I was like, is it too much?
Yeah.
It's too many different endings. But then it felt important because it's a movie about being entangled and trying to come untangled, and that is not a clean ending. Like, it's sort of that moment is drawn out, and you do have this kind of, and again, that's why it felt so important that she's sort of, Ruby like gives this hug goodbye, but it doesn't feel right, and she has to go back again for the real one that she wants, that it's just hard to pull apart, and it's not clean and it's not easy. And I remember working on the last shot, and we were talking about like, what is the feeling when she looks back at her family, and then and it was very important to me that she signed that to her family. And what she signs is actually beautiful, and I'm going to tell the story quickly. I know we don't have a lot of time, but So I'd originally written that she signs "I love you" out the window.
Right.
And then through the course of making the movie, everybody has a name sign, and your name sign is what represents you. So you don't have to finger spell everybody's name every time. And so we came up with, I think Troy actually gave it to Amelia or to the character, but so this is an R and this is a Y. So together, and this is where. So it was kind of like "Where's Ruby" was like, like this. So this was Ruby's, but this kind of became her name sign through the movie. The beautiful thing about this sign is that it also means "I love you forever" or "I really love you." So this is "I love you" and this is "I really love you." And it's kind of, if you like push it rather than shake it. And so that was like such a beautiful gift from ASL to be like, what she's signing out the window at the end, it holds all of those things.
Yeah.
It's her name, it's her identity, it's her deaf culture identity. And it's also "I love you forever." Now I'm going to cry because
same. Don't worry. I'm just crying.
But it's also like, I'm carrying this with me, right?
Yeah.
Like I am leaving you guys, but this is who I am. And this is coming with me wherever I go for the rest of my life. So
I think I just got goosebumps. I think the word "forever" after "I love you," even in just in the script, is magical. You know, it just does something for that phrase for that to be the last word of the script. That was just amazing. That made me cry for sure when I read it twice.
It's making me cry now.
It reminded me
a little raw right now, I think.
It reminded me a little bit of the end of Under the Same Moon, where the walk sign comes on.
Oh, that's a great ending too.
I don't know if you've seen that film with. Okay,
I'm working with Patricia Riggin right now. She's
my God,
an episode of Little America for us.
That last shot is just, it's pretty powerful, like this as well. So check it out if you can. But
also I love that she turns around, and that actually wasn't in the script, but it was something that we found on the day. Is she signs that back, but then she ducks in and turns around to face forward, and that was something we found. It's like she is looking ahead, like she is going off on her journey, whatever that is. And we thought about like, do we end on that sign? And I was like, no, I think she needs to like give that to them, let them know that, but then like set off on her path, because we all have to do it. And even when it sucks.
All right. Well,
listen, thank you so much.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you, Carrie,
thank you, Carrie.
And thank you, Enid, for your elegant scrolling. And thank you, everybody who showed up. This was so great. Oh my God, I'm just going to sit here in the dark and cry.
Also, good luck. Good luck. I know you've been awesome. So busy month for you. So
it's fun to talk about the script. I mean, it's funny because you like write a thing and then you go off and make it. And it's like to go back and look at the words on the page. I haven't read the script in a really long time. So it's.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear, because we love to do this. So.
This is like
that's all we do all day here.
Yeah.
We don't actually work.
We call people out about and we read scripts. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you so much, and we'll be watching you.
Cool. Thank you guys. This was great.
Thanks, everyone.
Good. Bye.
Bye.